So I wanted to talking about the books that I read in spring because we are headed into summer. It's already starting to get really warm here in LA. It is like 86 degrees where I am, which anything above the 85 I'm not happy with. So it that I just don't like the heat growing up from in the Bay Area. At any rate, I did read a lot in the springtime. Basically, I only read one book in March. That was probably my worst reading month of this year so far, but I did start some books in March. I just only read one complete book, and that was House of Hunger by Alexis Henderson. And this is kind of a dark gothic story that follows Marion, who becomes a blood maid in this like very elite society where they basically just like consume your blood, and she finds a mistress who is very like intrigued by her, by Marion, and ends up becoming this like much wanted in this world. And I thought this book was okay. I've been wanting to read books by Alexis Henderson for a while, and I was kind of in a gothic mood at the time, so I decided to pick it up. I believe this is YA. She has other books that I do want to read that I think are leaning more adult, but I thought the book was okay. There was like parts that I liked about it, like the writing and the world was like interesting, but to me, I didn't really connect with the characters, and like they just felt like too young for me for like the setting they were in. But it is sapphic, and I did like the friendships and like relationships she made, but also it just like with her like Marion as a person just felt too weird to be like in this world. Yeah, I don't know. Her character was very interesting, and it wasn't as scary as I thought it would be. I wish it was a little bit more scary, but yeah, I gave it a 3 star, which is kind of like the average rating of this book. And I was wanting to read a book about vampires to kind of get into that mindset of my own book that I'm currently writing. But yeah, it was just okay. But I do want to read her The Year of the Witching. Yeah, she has a lot of books actually, but that's the one that's like high on my list. But yeah, so after that, I ended up reading Lakesedge because again, I was still in this gothic world because this book that I'm writing is kind of a gothic story. It's set in the 1800s, like late 1800s, kind of close to like World War One, but I want to write it in the vein of a gothic story, so that's why I picked up a bunch of gothic books. But I read Lakesedge, which love this cover. This is the Owl Crate edition, and I actually did like this book. This I read in April. It was like the first book I read in April. I started it in March and then I finished it in April. But it is another gothic fantasy, and it's about a cursed lake, and this girl stays near there and meets a monster, and it kind of gave me like Frankenstein vibes almost. And I had recently watched the Frankenstein movie with Jacob Elordi and actually really enjoyed it. I do love these like gothic fantasies that kind of center around a monster. Like I really liked Two Dark Crowns as well, and I need to read the second book of that. But I really like this. I liked the writing style. It was very atmospheric, and this is kind of what I was missing from House of Hunger because it had more of that like supernatural scary elements that I was wanting and looking for. And I actually really liked the monster character, and I feel like there was a lot of like discussions about like what a monster really is and all that stuff, and like mental health and whatnot. But yeah, I really enjoyed this. I really loved the atmosphere, especially like it just felt really creepy being at this lake and this estate. And it definitely helped me for myself, like writing like more creepy undertones in my own stories. So yeah, really liked it. And I did like the characters in this as well. Like I said, I like the monster in it, and Violetta, I liked her too. But yeah, really, really good. And it kind of gave me like Crimson Peak vibes almost. If you've ever watched that movie, I actually really like that movie, but it kind of gave me those vibes if you were interested. And I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. And it's actually about the same average star rating on Goodreads as House of Hunger, but I really liked it. So yeah, this was a good read for me. Then the next book that I read was the Nightblood Prince. I randomly picked this book up. Oh, I forgot to tell you the author who wrote this is Lyndall Clipstone, and then the author who read or wrote The Nightblood Prince is Molly X Chang. And this is a Chinese fantasy about vampires. Again, I was in a mood of wanting to read books about vampires. And yeah, so there's like 2 different families, and the main female fae has like this prophecy that she has to become an empress, like a empress of all empresses, and it basically is based upon like who she marries, and has to marry the crown prince, but she also loves someone else, so it's kind of like a love triangle trope as well. And I picked it up because I had started watching The Pursuit of Jade, and I was in the mood to read something in Chinese mythology. I also bought this because I had some Barnes and Noble gift cards, and this was on discount, and the cover is pretty, and it was also a Good Morning America pick, I think. But yeah, it made me interested in more of Chinese mythology and stuff, and the cover is just gorgeous. And I didn't love this one as much as I thought I would. Again, I felt like it had a very younger writing tone, which I think I'm just like not digging a lot of YAs. And I do want to get into more like adult fantasies and more high fantasies, but I was intrigued by the world, and I did like the vampire stuff happening. I wish there was more vampire stuff happening. I felt like it wasn't like it focused too much on the romance versus like the curse and her being involved with vampires, at least in my opinion. But also the guy on this cover looks so much like the guy in The Pursuit of Jade, but that's like a completely different book that show is based on. But yeah, I kind of stopped watching Pursuit of Jade because I did not realize there was AI in it. I'm like, I don't know if I want to support AI in TV shows, but they used it in like editing and stuff like that. But yeah, I was really interested in mostly like the world of this, but felt like it was lacking. But yeah, I do want to read more books involving Chinese mythology. So like if anyone knows of any like adult Chinese mythology books, I would love some recs. So there is that. Then after that, I read this big old book, which is The Testaments. And I had read The Handmaid's Tale a long time ago, and this is like the sequel of The Handmaid's Tale. And I bought this book a while back, like a very long time ago. And I saw that they had made the show on Hulu, and I was interested in watching the show, but I wanted to read the book first. And I enjoyed this. There was a lot going on. It's very dark. The Handmaid's Tale is a very dark story, and but also like kind of relatable to real life, which is scary. I mean, that's what dystopians are essentially. And I thought it was really interesting to get more story about Lydia, and to like kind of get more of this like of the world of Gilead and how it's structured, following different characters and younger characters. But there's also, I would say, trigger warnings for like molestation and rape and all that. And it's just very dark. It's a very dark, brutal world. But yeah, I felt like the series, I did end up finishing the series. Really liked the show. I thought Chase Infinity was great. And I liked all the other characters. It was definitely dark. Again, I was like, I stopped watching The Handmaid's Tale, I think like season 3. I never finished it, but I was like, oh yeah, I forgot how dark this world really is. But there's a lot of like we see people getting hanged, and because that's just like part of the world. Like if you commit a crime, you get hanged. And also there, a lot of sexism in here because these girls are basically only used to make babies. So yeah, but I also, this cover, I didn't realize that there's like basically two covers on this. That's kind of cool. But yeah, I did like that we got more of the world and basically the different levels of like the females in Gilead and all of that. And I ended up, I think I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. Oh no, I gave it a 3, but I think I'm going to change that to a 4 because I did actually really like it and would highly recommend the show as well. Thought the show was really good, and like I felt like they chose like one main storyline of the book to be like the main plot point of the show, but we did get like the same characters and all of that. Yeah. The next book that I read was Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. I am not a classics girly, but I really wanted to watch the new Wuthering Heights movie because it was available on HBO Max and I there was just so much talk and buzz about that movie, and I haven't watched any other versions of this movie because there's been so many, but I wanted to see what all the hubbub was about and kind of give my own thoughts and feelings. And there definitely were choices made in that movie. I liked the aesthetics of it. It didn't really go with when this book is set in, but it was very visually appealing and I like the soundtrack. But those are all just like aesthetics. The actual movie is there were choices that the director made and it made me like the director less because I also didn't love Saltburn and again love the aesthetics of Saltburn but did not like the movie and but I did like her Promising Young Woman movie so I'm she is like a hit or miss for me but there like this felt like a fan fiction of the actual book because the book is very different than this version of the movie. Again, I hadn't watched any other versions of the movie, but I did read someone or I watched someone's review of it. I'll put it in the description below. But it did, she said there was more like, Gone with the Wind vibes, which has a history of its own. And I don't love talking about that movie, but there were a lot of like similarities and it felt more like Gone with the Wind more than Wuthering Heights. But I listened to the audiobook for Wuthering Heights and I think I'm going to physically read it. That's why I have this copy. I did not physically read this copy, but I want to physically read it because there was just so much information in this book and so many different characters we were following. And in the movie, they only followed Catherine and Heathcliff really and like their families and then the Catherine's maid and who she ended up marrying. There's like a bunch of characters in this tiny book and I just felt like I didn't really digest a lot of the story so I want to read it again before like giving my final thoughts but I didn't love it and I also just think that's because I'm not a huge classics person. Like I don't read a lot of classics. I typically read more modern classics. Like I love The Outsiders, I which I definitely think is a modern classic, and I've read that book many, many times, but I don't read a lot of like this century of classics because I don't love reading about that time period because it's just not the best time for people of color and also females. So like I just don't love reading about that time period. And I'm also just not interested in like elitist and like classism, and this book definitely dealt with a lot of classism and all of that. But yeah, I want to read it again and kind of like annotate the book because I just didn't grasp a lot of like what was happening with the audiobook, and the movie was like very different. So I just want to go into it again now, having like read it and also watching the movie, to just see like the major differences. And yeah, the main gripe a lot of people had with the movie was that they casted Jacob Elordi as Heathcliff, and I thought he did a good job with the role. I mean, he's a good actor. Like I've liked pretty much everything he's been in, but obviously the Heathcliff character is a person of color. I don't think they're black, but I do think they are. There's a slur that they use to describe this type of people. So I don't think they are white. But there's been many. It's funny that this story, or like this, adaptation in particular, had so much buzz about the Heathcliff character not being a person of color when most of the adaptations they have not been. And there's, I think, only one other adaptation that actually casted Heathcliff as like a black actor was casted for him. So I, again, that was another choice that they made. Um and the people who were people of color were like the villains of the story, which is a trope that I don't love in media. That often happens. But yeah, but again, I don't like have a lot of thoughts on this book because again, classics take a lot for me to read, and I feel like I don't digest them well. I also did not like the audiobook because I did not like the narrator, so I want to read it in its fullness physically and annotating. But yeah, that was Wuthering Heights. And then after that, I read Normal People by Sally Rooney, which I have never read before. And it's a pretty popular book on. Oh, I forgot to tell my rating of this. I think I gave it like a 3 out of 5 stars, but that was just based on my first reading. So yeah. But anyways, so Normal People by Sally Rooney. Had not read it before, but I did watch the show during the pandemic and I really liked it. And I was writing a dramedy at the time of reading this, that Normal People was a comp for the show I was writing. I kind of put a pause on that show because I wasn't really feeling it. But I think I just need to like re-outline it and go back and make it a bit more exciting for the next draft I write. My script basically follows like two characters and their relationship and something they work on together, and Normal People basically follows, the relationship of Marion and Connell. And they live in Ireland, and it's set in Ireland, which I really liked because I don't read a lot of books set in Ireland, and it is a place I do want to go to at some point. I still have not gone, but we basically start their lives as teenagers, and then they are in a relationship in high school, but it's not open, like no one really knows about it because Connell is from a different life and world than Marianne is. And then we kind of go through their like college years and their adult years and just their relationship and how they grow differently as people. And I actually really, really like this book. I haven't read a Sally Rooney book before, but I know she's very popular in general. I don't know how popular she is now, but back when I first started getting into reading after college, I just kept seeing her name everywhere. And again, I really loved the show Normal People, and it was pretty close to the book. Like it didn't veer off in any way. I think they excluded a couple of characters. Like I think Connell's grandma was in this, and I haven't finished rewatching it. So I don't remember if she shows up like in a different section, but I don't think she is in the show. And the book deals a lot about like depression and anxieties and just everything people go through in daily life and relationships, and you know how college can be a tough social world, and it just felt like everyday life but more relatable and more tangible, and that's why I really liked it. And it wasn't like dramatized in any way, shape, or form. I think that's why it's called Normal People because this is stuff that like people deal with in everyday life. And it's so funny because I didn't love Connell like in high school. I thought he was obviously very pretentious and just not, he didn't care about Marianne whatsoever. Like he liked being with her, but they obviously came from different worlds. But he still treated her like shit. And it was like, I really hated how he treated her. And then later on, we kind of get the story of him dealing with mental health issues and depression, and also, I would say anxiety. And again, that's what people deal with like every day. So, yeah, really enjoyed it. I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. I would be intrigued to read more like other Sally Rooney books just because I know she's a lot of people talk about her and stuff. And this is the most popular book I think I've seen of hers. And yeah, really liked it. The next and final book that I read recently, literally just finished it yesterday, and that is Katabasis. Katabasis. I don't know how to say it. I've heard it being called something like different each time. I thought it was Katabasis, but I don't know. But it's by R.F. Kuang, and I have read many books by R.F. Kuang. I've read the first Poppy War book, and I do need to get back into that series because I was interested in it. It was just very dark and heavy to read. So I do want to get back. And their books are fairly large. Most of her books are large. But yeah, so I read that one, and I read Babel, and then I also read Yellowface, which was probably the easiest book because it was contemporary, but it still dealt with like heavy topics. This book, the thing I have an issue with R.F. Kuang books is that there's a lot of academia and a lot of philosophical, educational writing in her books, along with like a magic system. But sometimes it's hard for me to understand all the like philosophical and academic stuff. And she did go to Cambridge, I'm pretty sure, and a lot of her books are kind of like in these higher society schools like Oxford and Cambridge. And yeah, she literally went to Cambridge and Oxford. So she's very smart. And sometimes when I was reading this book, I had to put it down because it was heavy. But when I was reading this book, I kind of felt dumb because a lot of it I didn't understand. And I had to take a philosophy class in college, but I went to Chico State, and I did not love philosophy. It was just too much for me, and I think that's just because my brain just doesn't like compute with that kind of thinking. And a lot of that was like she wrote that way in this book. So when that was happening, I was kind of falling out of the book because I was really interested in the plot, and it basically follows Alice and Peter who are students at Cambridge, and they are trying to save their professor who goes to hell. And I was like, oh, that sounds so interesting to me because like always I've never really, unless it's like an urban fantasy, like there's not a lot of books that are set in hell, but also like in this academic setting. Like usually they're at school and like weird stuff is happening. So it's like, oh, that sounds really interesting to me. But I was also like confused with the magic system. And I kind of felt this way while reading Babel. And I know a lot of people loved Babel, but for me, it was really hard to engage with Babel because she has a lot of info dump and it's very hard to grasp for me personally. I don't know. I also thought there were two different tones of this book because we were also getting like the relationship of Peter and Alice, and I didn't love Peter. And there is some parts about his life, like she went into detail about Peter having Crohn's disease, and I'm currently dealing with like stomach issues that I'm trying to figure out, and I did not need to get those detailed descriptions of like Crohn's disease because I'm dealing with similar symptoms. I don't need to know the inner details of all these symptoms as I'm currently dealing with them. So a lot of her stuff is like very detailed, and just I also don't love like body horror very much, but that was like hard for me to read. And yeah, so it was very dense and like not really what I was expecting. And I think that's also why I haven't really gone back into the Poppy War because like her books are so hard to digest for me. Like they're just a bit too academic for my liking. But like when we get into like the chapters that like define magic and like those little interlude chapters, like I was really enjoying those chapters, and I was so thankful there weren't any footnotes in this book, but it was just still hard for me to grasp. And I think I don't know, like I there are parts of her books that I really like, but there are also parts of her books that just are too much for me. So I gave this book I would say like a 3.5 out of 5 stars. Like there are things that I thought were kind of interesting, like hell and stuff, but I also felt like the end was kind of rushed a little bit, and I wanted more of hell itself because it was really interesting how it was structured from like any other media that I've consumed about like hell itself. I did used to watch Supernatural, and there's a lot of like stuff about like heaven versus hell in that story or in that series. So, yeah, I don't know. It was a lot. It was a lot. But yeah, those were all the books that I read in spring. So basically, like the March through May, beginning of June era. And now, like, my next wrap up will be for the summer because my reading schedule, like, my own reading is very, like, goes in waves. So one month I might read one book, but I don't want to post a video of a wrap up of one book. So that's why I decided to do this wrap up of just like a seasonal wrap up. So the next one will probably be like my summer wrap up. And I also don't do TBRs because I'm very much of a mood reader. So I pick up books based on when I'm reading or when I'm writing. And yeah, because I'm trying to be more intentional about the books that I read to help me like be better at writing. But I would love to know what you read in the springtime and if you made it this far. And I would love for you to tell me what your favorite book was in the spring. And I'm reading a lot of backlisted books, I feel like. I mean, Katabasis was probably the newest book that I read, but let me know if there are any new releases that I should be checking out, and also any recommendations for like more Chinese mythology books that are more adult. I think the next couple of books I'm going to be reading are more high fantasies and more adult. I just started reading The Unbroken because I, again, wanted to get back into high fantasies. And I've had this book for a while on my shelves. And I'm going to listen to the audiobook while reading because that's how I like to read now. And it's also a pretty big book. So, like, it'll probably take me a while. 486. Usually books this, but like it took me about 2 weeks to read Katabasis, and it'll probably take me about the same to read this book. But yeah, I'll give more thoughts about this in vlogs and stuff and such. But yeah, let me know all that stuff down below in the comments, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye.